ladies and gentlemen, we will get a bit more technical in this panel. I hope you can stomach that before lunch. Enlargement policy is, of course, a politically driven process, but it's underpinned by membership criteria, standards, conditions that candidates are expected to adhere to, as with any applicant to a club. Now, over time, this body of rules has, of course, expanded, while new cohorts of applicants, often poorer and because of their historical legacies under socialist authoritarian rule, in a process of catch-up and transformation, but also because of fears in existing member states about competitive pressures, I think are subject to longer and more sophisticated procedures, just to create flexibility in a process, pre-accession and post-accession, to meet some of the geopolitical and geostrategic objectives that enlargement is supposed to fulfill. And so, in 2012, with the new approach to EU enlargement, building on the Copenhagen criteria, the fundamentals were put. Respect for democracy, rule of law, human rights, they've been put front and center, or should I say first and last. Fundamentals first, but also last. We've heard that before. Yet, as a result of progression of time and also crises, the European Union has adopted that soft law approach to the common Copenhagen criteria in an even more flexible manner, of course. And the title of this panel, which is Principled Pragmatism, which is, of course, a phrase that was coined in the 2016 EU Global Strategy, I think encompasses this level of flexibility, or perhaps also this tension between strict adherence to the rules and the need for speed, that we want to discuss a bit more in this panel. And the question is, of course, that when in 2016 the EU already foresaw that it had to toughen up for a more fractious world and keep that geostrategic perspective on enlargement alive, the question is now whether indeed security is prevailing over other aspects. But it's just one of the questions. I think in a more neutral tone, perhaps, I would like to explore indeed the flexibility that exists in the application, the interpretation of pre-accession conditionality. We hear a lot about merits-based approach. Is that the same as a values-based approach? Or is it just, playing words here between what should be technically achieved on merit and where values can be interpreted in a more flexible way just to suit geopolitical interests? We hear about gradual integration, at the same time accelerated integration, but also partial integration, in the words of Director General Koopman from the Commission, and at the same time an appeal from the Ambassador of Sweden that all in that is fine, but should lead to full membership. And so this is the type of spectrum, I think, where our debate will come in, and we're fortunate, of course, to have old gentlemen, which was really not the intention, I can assure you, despite our best efforts, but we're very privileged nonetheless to have experts of the highest caliber to help us make sense of all of this. I would like to start with you, Alar Streimann, currently visiting professor at the Johan Skytte Institute of Political Studies at the University of Tartu, but in this country perhaps even better known as the former chief negotiator for Ukraine's accession to the European Union, for Estonia to the European Union, with, of course, a wealth of expertise in that respect. And please take us just back to the pre-2004 period in which you were negotiating, in which you were no doubt facing also concerns on the part of member states about political deadlines that have been set, the need for Estonia also to adapt to new realities. What level of flexibility did you find?
Well, thank you. And first of all, let me thank the organizers and the sponsors of this event. Really, I just picking up from your question, when we acceded the Union in 2004, I put my pen on the table and I thought that never again I'll be part of that process, because I was mentally and physically so exhausting. It was a huge work, of course, done by very many people. But again, I mean, you look at it today from a different perspective, and you see things which were quite similar during the accession of 2004. Well, I could give you lots of elements, starting from the number of the acceding countries, which was 10 countries, with lots of debates during the 5, 6, 7 years before the accession, how it should take place, whether it's regatta principle, individual merits. Nevertheless, everybody knew at the end of the day that we would be joining together. Because it is, and I think it's the same today, more or less, it's a huge geopolitical process, although of course there is a huge amount of rules, and we could come back to this rules thing, because there has been a lot of debate recently, whether these rules can be bent, to what extent, is there any flexibility? You yourself mentioned various scenarios. Some of them I would perhaps be ready to support, some others I would have doubts about. So there are similarities, there are differences. The main difference is that the Commission today is much more prepared to scrutinize the enlargement, to monitor, to observe, to analyze the preparedness of the candidate countries, which they were definitely not in 1997 when the process started with us. And before that, only 3 countries had been joining previously, recently. Sweden, Austria, and Finland, which didn't take so much work anyway. So most of the formulas, most of the framework which was elaborated for the accession of 2004 is still there. It's still there today, but again, as I said, I would argue that the Commission is much more prepared. There is a special enlargement directorate. There are experts, hundreds of people who are working on that. So that's a difference. So that we can really monitor the candidate countries better than perhaps these days. Having said that, there is perhaps also a slight bent in the requirements when it comes to the political requirements. If I look at the negotiating framework of today, which was recently, not so long ago, adopted, and I think France was, no, even before that. Yeah. France was one of the initiators for that. So we have this cluster system, which didn't exist in our days, but the chapters are more or less the same. And of course, there was no such opening or closing. And well, nowadays the EU has to invite even the candidate country to come forward with a position paper. We had a lot of discussion internally in my days when to put our position papers on table, because there was no regulation about that, and then there was, of course, a lot of tactical thinking, whether to do it rather sooner or whether to do it rather later, whether to do it one by one, whether to do it by package. So we thought it over. We even up to the end of how do we format the papers, so that they visually, perhaps even already visually, they would give some kind of ideas and try to insinuate a few things for the EU side. So it is a huge process. But again, my saying and looking at the realities of today in Europe and globally, and it was the same already in the 90s. Let's put it this way, that perhaps the enlargement of the 90s of the EU would not have taken place without the collapse of the Soviet Union. So it was directly or indirectly a result of that. or at least triggered by it, and today we are more or less in the same situation. So we need to perhaps take another look at this enlargement situation today. We could, in some moments, we could speed it up. We could perhaps reinvigorate it in some other moments. But I would be very hesitant about speaking values and giving up certain values. Because if I look back at Estonia, why we became the member of the Union, and we're still there, the support for the EU is very high in Estonia, is that these are the countries who share the same values. I listened very carefully recently. I just took some time and listened to the debates in Munich, and I was surprised. I think there was a very interesting debate where the prime ministers of Macedonia, North Macedonia, and Albania were participating. And I don't remember, one of them said, "Well, yes, well, there's very turbulent times. Why don't we perhaps?" I don't remember exactly what he said, but he said something like, "Let's not put so much stress on the values. Just let's bring the candidates into the European Union, and then we see what happens next." So I would like to argue a little bit with these kind of arguments. There you are. But that would be an endless story. I agree there is necessity to do things perhaps a little bit differently, a little bit better. But there are certain limits of what we can do, and very much depends on the readiness of the candidates, really. And that was always our own principle, that we didn't bring our bilateral problems to Brussels. Everything we could sort out, we sorted it out at home. So that was the main one of the main principles.
Thanks a lot. Tomasz Hagleitner, you are head of unit responsible for enlargement strategy and coordination at newly called DG Enest, Enlargement Eastern Neighbourhood of the European Commission. How does the European Commission these days assess readiness, progress, regression of member states, of candidate countries, rather? Freudian slip.
Yeah. Okay, thanks a lot, Stephen. I'll try not to be too technical. I'm one of these bureaucrats in Brussels trying to organize the geopolitical process about enlargement, and a privilege to be here with one of the most eminent academics on enlargement, Stephen. Now, I mean, to pick on where the chief negotiator at the time left it. Let me just very briefly explain how we involved, I think, in terms of our conditionality and the way we are looking at it. At the time of the fifth enlargement, in a way, it was fairly easy. We started the accession negotiations once we considered that the Copenhagen political criteria, democracy, functioning institutions, rule of law were fulfilled. And then the rest was sort of a technical exercise going through the chapters. In essence, this was the way the fifth enlargement was conducted. Since then, we have learned it's not as easy as that, in a way, and we have introduced a third layer, in a way. We, of course, still have the Copenhagen criteria, political criteria. They are key. They still determine whether we start negotiations, and then when they are undermined, then the process comes to a halt. I mean, we've seen this in the past with Turkey. We see it now with Georgia. Then we have sort of between the acquis and the big Copenhagen criteria, we have now in the middle what we call fundamentals, rule of law, where we have developed a sort of an approach that as the rule of law underpins whatever is happening in the other chapters, they first of all have to be addressed at the beginning and can only be closed at the end, and that the progress on the other chapters is conditional upon progress under the fundamentals. So that is what we have introduced into the revised methodology. And then, of course, we have the usual conditions on the acquis, which are still which are still there. We have made them more explicit compared to the fifth enlargement, what we call now benchmarks. At the time, sometimes candidate countries complained it wasn't clear what we wanted. We're now spelling it out in much more detail. But just to illustrate as well with examples how important the fundamentals are and what practical impact they have on the negotiations. Take Montenegro, for example. They made the interim benchmarks on rule of law last year that opened the path towards the closure of chapter. This was the reason, because they met the rule of law interim benchmarks, we were able to start closing chapters. We closed 3. We hope to close more under the Polish presidency. In the same way, Albania, for example, opened the fundamentals cluster in October last year as a first cluster, and that again, this allowed us to move towards the opening of other clusters. We already did one at the end of last year, and we hope to do as many as possible again under the Polish presidency. That just shows a bit the importance of working on the fundamentals is determining the overall pace, and that's why we are so focused now in the negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova on opening the fundamentals cluster as quickly as possible.
I will push you a little bit later on merits versus value-based approach and the balancing clauses that for certain candidate countries have come into play as an interpretative tool, perhaps, of a geopolitical, geoeconomic nature. But I would like to first go to Oleksandr Ilkov, who is kindly agreed to step in for Olga Stefanishina. Mr. Ilkov is Director General at the Government Office for Coordination of European and Euro-Atlantic Integration of Ukraine. We're very pleased you could join us online, Mr. Ilkov. I would like to hear from you how you perceive this notion of pre-accession conditionality, given the security situation that Ukraine is in, and what still some of your political leaders are calling for, which is, readiness of Ukraine to join the European Union within the next 2 years.
Distinguished colleagues, partners, friends, it's my real pleasure and honor to be here with you today, and I'm grateful to the International Center for Defense and Security for organizing this event. And taking this opportunity, I would also like to express my sincere gratitude to hosting country Estonia for its reliable support, significant military, financial, and humanitarian assistance, and as well as its active role in consolidating the international community in defense of Ukraine. Today's event takes place in a time of turbulence when the entire world order, which was built and successfully developed based on the values of Western democracy, is under threat. And today we are not only talking about Ukraine's future, we are all talking about the future of Europe as a whole. And we are firmly convinced that neither the European Union nor Ukraine can see this future without Ukraine's full membership in the European Union. And in fact, we believe that the European Union needs Ukraine in the same way that Ukraine needs the European Union. Together we are stronger in all dimensions, political, military, and importantly, economic. I will name just a few of the benefits of Ukraine's accession to the EU. We believe that Ukraine's membership in the European Union will definitely become an important factor in strengthening security, and it will also contribute to the strengthening of the EU's political and strategic influence on the international arena. Economically, Ukraine has huge untapped potential with powerful agriculture and the industrial sectors, highly educated workforce that will help enhance the competitiveness of the EU economy in world markets. Huge opportunities will be opened up for European companies to invest in Ukraine's large-scale recovery and reconstruction after, hopefully, just peace, which will come to Ukraine. And regarding the security dimension, considering the new geopolitical realities, Ukraine, with one of the most powerful armies on the continent, is a key element in building a new, strong Europe. At the same time, bearing in mind all advantages of Ukraine's accession to the European Union, we recognize that this process may cause certain economic concerns for EU member states. And sudden and unreasoned accession could present challenges for both Ukraine and the European Union. And in this regard, we support an approach that involves gradual or phased integration. In our opinion, such approach will allow Ukraine to harmonize its economy with that of the EU while ensuring that EU member states also will have the time and space to adapt. So what should this balance, or as the conference organizers aptly called it, pragmatic approach be based on? In our view, the main components of this approach are already reflected in the negotiation framework, which governs Ukraine's accession to the European Union and which was adopted by the European Union while opening negotiations with Ukraine. First, it is clearly stated that if Ukraine makes sufficient progress on reform priorities, this should lead to closer integration with the European Union through phasing into individual EU policies, the EU market, and different EU programs. Of course, in a merit-based and reversible manner. Second, primary focus should be given to areas where Ukraine already has the capacity and expertise for export to the EU, and to those areas which are areas of mutual strategic interest. And third, transitional measures could be agreed during the negotiations, provided that they not involve amendments to the rules or policies of the Union, disrupt their proper functioning, or lead to significant distortions of competitions. I think that it is within this framework we should jointly work out the path, which ultimate goal should be Ukraine's full membership in the EU, but each step along the way will make Ukraine more and more integrated into the Union. For this to become a reality, a pragmatic approach, again, in our opinion, should not be cynical. We will never achieve this goal if, despite the progress made, Ukraine remains hostage to the political processes in the member states or the turbulence which we are facing right now. The current enlargement methodology is designed in such a way that every step, even a technical one, requires unanimous approval by all member states. And unfortunately, there are no guarantees against arbitrary and unjustified blocking of the enlargement process. And this is probably the key risk and threat at the moment, and this is definitely something we need to work on. I want to assure you that Ukraine, as it has always been, is fully devoted to EU accession, ensuring quality, dynamics, and credible process. And our commitment to this principle reflects our confidence in our ability to meet the necessary criteria and to prove that our place is within the European Union. So together we can overcome the challenges and build a brighter future for present and future generations, and a brighter future in the enlarged European Union. I will stop here, and I will be happy to answer your questions, if any.
I'm sure there will be. Thank you so much for pointing out a couple of things that chime well with what we've heard before, and that I'm sure our audience, which has been very patient up until now, will certainly want to interact as well once we've worked ourselves through the panel. But the presidency, of course, has been mentioned a couple of times already, and there are a lot of expectations from all sides about the opening of new negotiations clusters with several candidate countries. At the same time, Poland, pre-electoral presidential campaign mode, is a bit caught in its domestic politics as well. We've seen, of course, over the last year, massive protests also by farmers, by transport companies, and so there seems to be an inherent tension there that needs to be explored a little bit. I would like to hear on both accounts from Tomasz Wiśniewski, who is head of unit for EU enlargement at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Poland, how this will pan out.
Well, thank you very much for giving me the floor. I will start by thanking the organizers, ICDS, the MFA of Estonia, the European Commission, for organizing this event. We are very glad as presidency that we could support it. And I'm pretty sure that Estonia has a very special role in enlargement policy. Since the very beginning, you've been in favor of further enlargement, and as a proof of that, I can not everyone is aware of that, but as a proof of that, I can tell you that Estonia is the initiator of so-called Tallinn Group, an informal gathering of member states that are fully supportive towards EU enlargement, and Poland is gladly participating in this informal gathering. It's a very good forum for discussing the most timely issues in reference to enlargement policy. Last year we had the meeting of Tallinn Group in Warsaw. It helped us to prepare for our task as a presidency. And as a presidency, even though we have presidential election, we will be very ambitious, especially in terms of enlargement. As you must have heard already, Polish presidency is focusing on different areas of security. But we combine security and enlargement policy. We believe that by enlarging the EU, we extend the area of security. Of course, not only security, but also prosperity. Having this in mind, you will understand that our presidency will very much focus on delivering results in enlargement policy. What can be done and what cannot be done? I mean, there are many issues that are. The process of enlargement is a long-lasting process, so you cannot have the immediate results, no matter how hard you try. But there are certain steps that can be taken, and we will do our best to make sure that they will happen. And looking into the East, I will start by saying that we will definitely make sure that we will take every opportunity to allow Ukraine and Moldova to enter the active phase of negotiations. And this can be done only, as Tomasz has said a minute before, by opening the first cluster. So according to the current methodology that we have, we cannot do anything else. We cannot open any other area of negotiations without opening the first cluster. And I can already tell you that this process is very difficult in the Council. We had already the first round of discussion at the working level. We had it also on Coreper level, and I'm not. I can be very frank with you that finding the solution will not be very easy, but I hope it will happen, and I hope it will happen as soon as possible, without waiting until the end of the presidency. Obviously, what we hear from Kiev, from Chisinau, our partners would like to see much more progress during our presidency. That we are not excluding that, but first things go first. I mean, there is no other option. We have to start with the very beginning. There is a chance to do so, and I hope and I really count on a change of approach of our Hungarian colleagues. Hopefully they will be able to somehow move in the European spirit and agree on the solutions that are proposed by the Commission and that are shared by most of the member states. But during the presidency, we will not focus only on the East. We will have equal treatment and equal focus also on Western Balkans. Over there we see a possibility of moving ahead, obviously with Albania. This country started last autumn in a speedy way, and we are ready to maintain this speed. We would like to have the second and the third clusters open with Albania. We are ready also to move ahead with Montenegro. This country is much more ahead of any others in terms of negotiations. So in this case, we are talking about closing chapters. It is possible to close at least 2 chapters. And we are also ready to support North Macedonia on their accession path, but this depends on their ability and on their decisions to amend their constitutions as it was clearly mentioned in the negotiation framework. Turkey will remain the candidate status. However, the process with Turkey is to some extent on hold. But as a presidency, we will try to make sure that we have the highest possible dialogue with Turkey. And as an example, I can let you know that yesterday we had the informal General Affairs Council with all the candidate and aspiring countries present, including Turkey. Unfortunately, what we learned from our round of consultations before the presidency, there is no green light from so-called non-recognizers towards the application of Kosovo. Something might change during the period that we have the presidency, but I'm not very optimistic. And last but not least, I would like to mention Georgia. That is very close to our hearts, and it is very painful for us as for Poles to see that they, in a sense, withdrew from the accession process. I mean, their government did so because, as per our knowledge, it is not shared widely by the society. So, in this respect, we would like to call for further support of the civil society, especially the pro-democratic one and the pro-European one. So, as you see, the presidency has its limits, and within these limits, we will do our best to make sure that there is a progress, no matter what the political situation is in Poland. I mean, I don't see such a. I mean, it's not very problematic. I mean, we have elections, but they are not about enlargement. It is not the key topic of our elections. If you are talking about the protests, if you are talking about the society approach, of course, we need to make sure that we have the public support behind us. We cannot make enlargement happen if we lose the public support. So we must listen to the people, we must listen to the business, and we must focus on preparing the enlargement in such a way that it is as unharmful for the business and for the society of the current member states as possible. I think it is in the hands of the Commission, it is in the hands of future presidencies, it is also in the hands of negotiators on both sides. The process is very interesting. Thank you very much for choosing this very important topic of the conference. It's a very timely moment to discuss it, and especially now when we are in such a turbulent times in the history.
Thank you very much. Maybe if you allow me, just two brief interim observations. One, there is momentum in the enlargement process, but it's uneven. And I think this last overview has clearly shown that. And it is uneven because not just there's maybe an obstruction on the side of the candidate countries, but especially, and in more cases, there's obstruction from within the council, the member states. Not always the same, by the way. That's one point I think we should unpack a little further, and it's also what Mr. Ilkov and yourself, Mr. Streimann, have referred to. A second one would be there's effectively a two-track approach to the enlargement process. There's a formal track of negotiations, chapters, clusters, conditions, and in the absence perhaps, or as a safety valve to keep the whole process going, the gradual integration track, which in fact is partial. It is pre-identified priority areas into the single market, maybe defense for Ukraine, who knows, but could be a dead end if full integration and synchronization with the formal accession process is blocked by any member state. Okay. Taking a step back, now looking at Serbia. Luka Glušac, Deputy Director at the Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory at the University of Belgrade, which might sound academic and obscure, but is very much in, maybe not on the front line, but at least very actively involved in the protests of a democratic nature, which have been rocking Serbia for the past year plus or so, after the fraudulent elections, and of course triggered again after the Novi Sad railway station disaster, which killed 15 and which has led to a student-led protest now. Where's the European Union, as far as you are concerned, in applying pre-accession conditionality to Serbia?
Well, first of all, thank you for your kind invitation, and to organizers and supporters of the conference. I will try to reflect on both these two interim interventions that you made, also from the perspective of rule of law, especially because the rule of law was at the very beginning not in the center of the enlargement discussions. It was more about economic matter, about the potential of members to fully integrate and function within the union, and then so to say, it was more about a key, and I would say the core values were, so to say, taken for granted or assumed that they were shared by the new members. And I would say that maybe the rule of law emerged as a central issue only once the geopolitical imperatives began shaping the enlargement processes, and perhaps already with 2007 enlargement, that shift was rather demonstrated in a clear way, and I do believe just some recent history also show that, you know, when there is a crisis within the European Union, different actors are trying to step in. We can see that, to be honest, also with China, especially in the Central and Eastern Europe, in the Western Balkans, which largely replaced the EU as the major construction infrastructure funder, to be honest, with far less oversight and far less ex-ante, post oversight than in the case of the EU funds. And I do believe that is important because with a lot of direct negotiations, little or no public procurement, web of subcontractors, which actually serve that everyone gets a piece of the pie. The result is that we have a system which is tailor-made for corrupted regimes, and in such circumstances, really the rule of law can only deteriorate. And then I would say that in parallel process, we had the EU global strategy and promoting the principled pragmatism as a balancing act between the interests and values on one side, but also opened up the field for many compromises and trade-offs. And especially with the EU's internal rule of law a crisis that opened up a lot of uncertainty also on the candidate countries' perspective in terms of whether, how, and when the EU would expand, and also having that peculiar situation of obviously demanding respect of rule of law in the candidate countries by fighting the same battle at home. And I would say that this principled pragmatism syntagm lost its balance. It was more pragmatism at the expense of the principles. Now, I do strongly believe that the EU membership should only be granted when a country fully complies with a key, and this is a prerequisite if you want to join here the rules of the club. And we already, spoke much about the merit-based system, which we, in a way, you can also see discussion about the dichotomy between the merit-based system and political decisions. I would say that decisions to have a merit-based system is already a political decision in the first hand. So I think from the candidate countries' perspectives, once the country fully meets the acquis, but also obviously the Copenhagen fundamentals, however we call it, these days membership must be granted, no new conditions, no moving targets. I think this is particularly important, and I think that this principle must apply at every stage of association or accession process, because if the country can even go as far as changing its constitutional name to resolve a bilateral dispute and fulfilling every agreement, and yet remain stuck at the same stage, that really sends a bad message. And I do believe that also such situations are also undermining the EU conditionality policy, which is in the very heart of the process.
You're referring to North Macedonia?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Turning more to Serbia, we have a nationwide protest, as you mentioned, against the political regime, and the protests which are really organic in terms that they are initiated and run by students. And this is something really, really new. We have demonstrations which are fundamentally against endemic corruption and against state capture. But what is also interesting here that the EU flags are almost entirely absent from the protests, and you can see also, to be honest, from the EU officials that as a negative, so to say, the negative side during the protests. But I would say that this is not because the demonstrations or the protesters support or are influenced by Russia, as some superficial commentators claim, or to be honest, something that also Serbian officials are trying to claim while speaking with Western allies, but also because it seems that the EU no longer symbolizes the rule of law as in the past, and especially in the media in Serbia. Unfortunately, Hungary is more the symbol of the EU than Estonia, Finland, or Sweden, which I also find very, very problematic. So the EU, in a way, but also with its reaction to this protest in Serbia is, in a way, complicit in supporting authoritarian regime in Serbia. And so I would say that, or I would ask, like, to what extent is the pragmatic to accept authoritarianism as a way to maintain stability? Of course, stability is important, especially in these days, and I would say that even the promotion of stability is the best strategy, but only in short term. I would say also that in long-term repressive regimes results in more instability and more structural instability, long-term instability, which down the line they fuel more popular discontent, as evident in Serbia. And with such a popular discontent, you also see, to be honest, more repression from the government. So, going back to the title of the panel, I do think that the principal pragmatism has to be returned into equilibrium. The new growth plan for Western Balkans is a sign of the EU commitment to make the region economically stronger. But to be honest, it still speaks a little about the ultimate outcome. I think we have to clarify, gradual, partial, phased enlargement, because it is still unclear, and I would say that still the rule of the games are not completely clear. And I think that once the EU really presents a clear, credible, reliable, durable enlargement plan, the candidate countries, even those less enthusiastic as currently my own, I think they will deliver. And I would say that in the past, really, the EU was the best choice. And unfortunately, with these circumstances today, the EU seems to be the choice of only those with no other choices. And I urge us all, really, I urge us to really make the EU the best choice again.
Thanks very much, Luka. That's sharp. I would like to offer the audience, which has been so patient with us, the opportunity to intervene with any questions or observations you may have. If you do so, please raise your hand, state your name and affiliation, and try and be brief. I have my own questions, and I'm sure some of the panelists will want to react to what they've heard from each other, but I think you come first now. So please raise your hand. I see Klenjarat there.
Hello, and from this side of the room this time, but overall, I think there has been...
Your affiliation, please.
Okay, I'm head of ESTEV, which is the Estonian Development Cooperation Agency, which works in Moldova, Ukraine, Armenia, formerly also Georgia, and also in African countries on development cooperation, but especially in EU integration in the track of that discussion. But anyways, my point is that we speak of gradual integration, and shall we decide when the accession moment in that gradual integration comes, maybe? And given this geopolitical nature of the expansion of this neighboring empire, maybe we should revisit the negotiating framework in the sense that maybe define core chapters, like chapter 23 maybe, which is the fundamental rights, and then single market, and for the rest of it, imagine a way where the integration continues after the accession moment, where financing, seat at the table, and also some of the other aspects. For example, if climate agenda, I mean, compared, which Alar failed maybe to mention, the acquis is twice, I think it would be almost impossible to become a member of the European Union currently if we continue the same way, while actually in the next 10 years, we will put another third of the EU acquis into works. And then it's also, of course, made by the rich countries, which will be very expensive to meet for the poorer ones. So can we imagine a way where this gradual integration process continues after the accession, and what would have to be met before? And for us, even, it continued. It took us a few years to get into Schengen's. There was an internal border before that. It got us a few years into getting to Eurozone. It got us a few years. Can we imagine, for example, in the climate agenda, that until you meet the agenda, you are faced to CBAM, for example, for next 10 years. And if you meet the agenda, you can join also without that kind of tariff barrier. The core of it being a member state. And then the policies are maybe a little bit more flexible.
Thanks very much, Glenn. Anyone else?
I have a question.
Please.
Angelusha Marina from European Council on Foreign Relations. Stephen, you mentioned that there is this, of course, a very obvious security element in the whole talk of the town at the moment, but not just at the moment, but for the past 3 years. And then Secretary General from Estonia also mentioned the security element, how Estonia joined NATO a month before and other Eastern European countries. And on this panel, Alar, I think you alluded to the last enlargement phase and the security element. So, you know, last phase of enlargement brought all these countries into the NATO first. It was definitely a geopolitical calling then as well. To the fall of communism, the need to bring all these countries into European Union and stabilize them economically, politically, and so on and so forth. I think at the back of everyone's mind was Russia even then, but a much weaker Russia. So my question is, to cut the long story short, is this enlargement process fit enough to deal with all these issues, or should we start to reinvent a new process of enlargement that could deal with all the challenges? Otherwise, do you see the need for all the candidate countries plus Kosovo to come in as a potential detriment to the European project? Thank you.
Thank you, which follows in line with the previous question. Can we reimagine membership? Can we reimagine the accession process? Third intervention.
Thank you. I'm Hovannes Yukinyan from Armenia, from Estonian Diplomatic School. Thank you for a good panel, for good discussion. We heard about all countries, the Balkan countries, but maybe you heard that also Armenian government announced that they are taking like EU way and they would like to have a more integration with EU. My question is about what's your opinion about EU enlargement process in South Caucasus especially, and how you see EU foreign policy in South Caucasus? Thank you, especially for also in Armenia. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Looking around the room. Panorama vision. Yes.
Is this on? Yes.
Can you stand up?
Sorry, my name is Jakob Levander. I'm from the Swedish Institute for European Policy Studies. Thanks a lot for anybody who has been involved in arranging this. I have a question about the accession process and what's been mentioned about hijacking the accession process on the part of several member states. This is not a new thing, and this is not treaty-based. It's based on practice. And I would just like to know about if there are any ideas on how to escape this practice, and not referring to the treaties, because I think this is a political problem rather than a treaty-based problem. So if there are any ideas on reflection on how to escape this practice, I'd be very interested in hearing about it. Thank you. Thanks
a lot, Jakob. Anyone else? We can have a second round later on. Let me bring it back to the panel. Alar. Well, some of the questions actually related straight to some of your points, so you want to elaborate, no doubt.
Well, thank you. I really don't know. It would be an endless story, because it's really a big thing, and lots of things are going about. And I really appreciate that our Ukrainian colleague is with us, because I have the privilege to be part of the high-level advisory group that the ambassador of Sweden mentioned on behalf of Estonia, and we're working together with Ukrainian colleagues. And what I really appreciate is the engagement, the willingness really to prepare to become a member state. And this is even if there are some problems elsewhere, but for me, this is enough. This is already one of the strongest arguments. There is a willingness to become a good, reliable member state, and that's an important step. Now, we have been somewhat struggling.
Hungary too, when it wanted to join.
Okay, yes. By the way, we had a very good cooperation with Hungary when we were both negotiating. So I'm a little bit perplexed how far apart now we seem to be slipping. But again, I mean, that's a long story. Let's not get into that. It's always a political decision. If you look at the okay, we are just speaking about the 80,000 legal acts which form the body of the EU acquis today. About half of them are really serious internal market issues, things like that. Well, it's impossible to say where does the borderline go once you could be a proper member state and once you could really be kind of part of member state. But I'm sure nobody of the candidates would like to become a kind of a second-grade member state where they would be partly involved in some of the big issues and then be left outside of the other things. So Glenn very properly indicated that Schengen, we had the same thing. Some countries even today are not using the common currency euro, and that's okay. So there are minor things. Let's not get lost. I mean, that's at the end of the day, we can all agree about it. It's about the political agreement. We can agree that we'll cut this big acquis into the smaller one. That would be a big political decision. I don't see these political characters, at least today in Europe, who would stand up and say, now, that's a crucial moment. We are the statesmen or stateswomen. We'll tell you and we'll lead you and propose these ideas, how to go further. I'm waiting to see these people to come out. And we have a saying that in every crisis you get these people. They perhaps are somewhere and they will come together and we will come together and we agree that we do things differently. Right now we have the rule-based process. It's Article 49 in the EU treaty, which says, well, quite vaguely, by the way, how the accession process should go. So we could, in principle, if we all agree, we could change it. We could make it different. Then on the second level, we have this framework for the negotiations. Again, it's a consensual agreement by the member states. We could change it. It's a very painful process, but we could change it. There are other things we could do on this long timeline, or perhaps from left to the right. We could give the candidate countries more access to the decision-making bodies. We could invite them to become observers in many decision-making moments, as happened to us before the accession, after the signing of the accession treaty, and before we came the member, was 1.5 years. We were the observers in almost all the EU formats, the council formats, the working groups. I think it would be a very good confidence-building measure to bring the candidate countries' representatives to listen, to observe, perhaps to give their reflections on the decision-making. But again, you have to have a clear confidence that these countries will not deviate from the process of wanting to become a good member. And I have no miracle solution how to guarantee that. That in the middle of the process, there would be a change of government in some of the candidates who say, okay, so far we did it this way, but tomorrow we do it differently. So I think there are many things we could really discuss. And my point where I'm trying to get now is that perhaps because of this global moment, and I strongly believe that, well, there is lots of academic studies telling us how the world is developing cyclically, especially when there is generation-based cycles. I believe that there is such moment of change, and the EU is never static. It's always changing as well. And we should not treat it as a kind of historic icon which cannot be changed. I think it should be changed. We should adapt to the developing world and do it together. So from that point of view, I would rather argue that we now take this enlargement issue as where we stand, knowing what are the developments in the United States, in China, in Russia, elsewhere, globally. We look at it together and perhaps make a few good decisions. Perhaps a few things can be changed, can be made easier and faster. Whatever it is, I don't want to get into the details. I might have some ideas, but I feel that we should try at least. That's my message.
Thank you. Tomasz Hagleitner. The Commission has a revised methodology since 2020. The appreciation seems to be that it has its limits. I'm sure you might share some of the frustration about indeed the hijacking by individual member states in this soft law procedure, which has become so cumbersome. And the gradual integration is in a way an escape route in that sense to keep the process going. I would like you to reflect on this, on the current thinking within the European Commission about ways to overcome individual blockages by member states within the formal process. Is there anything that can be done? And perhaps you would like to react also to the points that Luka raised, which of course go back to the European Commission's own stance on the protests, anti-corruption, anti-democracy protests in Serbia, and the rather weak statements which we have seen coming out of the European Commission. I mean, Commissioner Kos's letter in that sense was, I think, a missed opportunity. But that's my appreciation. So please.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Yeah, a few reflections along those points. First, on unanimity and member states. I mean, of course, it's easier for the Commission always to say, and we are in favor of more qualified majority. We are in favor of more qualified majority, including in the area of enlargement. We've said it before. We say it now. Is it going to happen? I don't think so. It's not going to happen. This is simply a reality we have to live with. I fully agree with all those who say that it is a problem to the merits-based approach if indeed bilateral issues prevent countries from moving forward. It is a problem. It is an issue. There are ideas moving to qualified majority. As said, politically, I think it's unlikely. I don't think. I mean, gradual integration. I wouldn't phrase it as you did as an alternative to overcoming it. The way I would, and there I'll go a bit into this whole business because it came up from a number of colleagues. Gradual, accelerated integration prior and post accession, and it links, I think, very much to the title of principled pragmatism, because I think we have to be principled on the criteria. We can be pragmatic on the timing and the slicing of some of the criteria. Now, on gradual integration, I mean, just for the sake of it, we used to call it as Commission accelerated integration. The Council in its wisdom called it gradual integration, didn't want to accelerate, but in essence we are talking about the same thing. What it means is having benefits of accession, of membership already prior to accession. We're trying to get away from a situation that we had on the fifth enlargement, where most of the things came in upon accession or very shortly before accession, because the observer status you referred to for Estonia, for example, came in upon signing the accession treaty. Of course, as of then, the acceding countries had observer status in all EU bodies. We'll try to go further and see where, in which policy areas, in which initiatives, in which programs, in which parts of the single market candidate countries can already take place prior to accession. And again, for various reasons, this all is not an alternative. I think the Swedish ambassador said it to accession. The way we see it, it should accelerate accession. I give you one example. It's a bit technical. SEPA, the Single Euro Payment Area, where last year Montenegro and Albania were part of, and we hope other countries will join soon. Now, this is not just a political decision. It is underpinned by heavy regulatory alignment on not only payment systems, banking law, but anti-money laundering. Done by the countries, assessed by us, etc. So it is work that is useful for the accession as such, and it has tremendous benefits for citizens once it kicks in. So, and it is an element of confidence building. It was also mentioned between candidate countries and member states. We are looking wherever else this can be done. I'm not hiding that it's difficult, because we are, there is no particular, for most of the things we need to do or we want to do on the single market, you need to have a legal base. You need to have a framework within which that can happen, and we don't have it in all areas. And then there is a decision to be taken. Do we want to create all of this prior to accession, or do we go the other way around and do some of the things after accession? Which brings me to the question again, what can be done after accession? Obviously, a lot of things can be done after accession. It's nowhere said in Article 49 that the only things that should happen after accession is a 10-year phasing in of direct payments under the Common Agricultural policy, and 3 years for structural funds, and the 7 years transitional period for free movement of workers that we included in the last enlargement. It's nowhere written in Article 49. Obviously, one can go much further. The negotiating framework already speaks about Schengen and the euro afterwards. One can go further. One can postpone things after accession. The only thing one needs to be clear then, that this has consequences. So if you're not part of the single market, we need to have customs controls. We need to have border controls. If you do not come up to, because behind these technical words, let's open a cluster or a chapter, there are substantial issues behind that. It's about EU food safety standards, for example. Mr. Musk might not like our standards, but people like to eat safe foodstuffs, for example. So unless you have the same foodstuff in the new member state, then you have free circulation of it. Otherwise, try to convince your public opinion that's a good idea to have a new member state in there. So you also have to factor in public opinion. But obviously, what we are trying, and I summarize what we are trying to do, we're trying to anticipate as much as we can prior to accession, wherever we can, wherever we have the possibilities. But we're also keenly aware that in the current geopolitical context, in a situation where the EU acquis obviously is a complex element, we'll have to postpone a certain number of issues after accession. And you can have a proper mechanism as well after accession, ideally by qualified majority. If member states agree by unanimity to have these things done by qualified majority, I think that would actually be a workable solution. But one just needs to think through the whole thing, because that some of these ideas are easily said. I came to Prime Minister Rama, or if I may, in Munich, who said, he didn't say it in these terms, but he sort of said, let's get us into the single market. Let's do that quickly. Now, it's easier said than done, because the single market, technically speaking, is the most complicated part of it. It's the core of the European Union. And being in the single market without having, then the social standards, the environmental standards, the climate standards being respected, again, try to convince other member states that, then you have a level playing field. So, which brings, it needs a lot of thinking what actually can be done after accession. This is what I'm trying to say. It's not as easy. You cannot just slice down the acquis saying this is what we're going to do before accession, is what we're going to do after accession. A lot of the acquis is actually connected and the political package, but I think we are, all keenly aware, and it will require some reflections, that the accession treaty of the fifth enlargement, which by the way was also different from previous enlargements, but the new accession treaties will look different. On Serbia, sorry, I've been a little bit long. Luka, I full, of course, sympathy. I would say, well, two things. One is when you say about conditionality, I wouldn't now pick up on necessarily on public statements. I would take a step back, because public statements come and go. But if you look at the pace of the accession process in Serbia, I'm afraid to say it hasn't gone anywhere over the last years. So ask the Serbian authorities, and they'll complain about it.
Sorry to interrupt. This is my fine point.
Yeah.
The Commission says that on merits, technical standards, cluster 3.
Yes.
Has been met, the opening benchmarks could have been met for negotiations to start. Yet you have member states who say, yeah, but fundamentals, rule of law, that's no go. So how can the Commission divorce merits on technical level from values.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I wouldn't put it like that.
Of course.
First, again, if you take a step back, the accession negotiations with Serbia haven't advanced. So the conditionality in that sense, it works. They have advanced with other countries. They haven't advanced with Serbia, unfortunately. Now, the issue, I mean, okay, it's getting a little bit complicated on the cluster 3, but if you look at our assessment on the overall balance in our annual reports, it's different for Montenegro than for Serbia, so we have a more nuanced assessment. We actually we have said the technical conditions are fulfilled for cluster 3, but we've also engaged in a process with Serbia on a number of issues related to the fundamentals that should in parallel happen in order to allow the opening of cluster 3. And I think that comes a little bit what I said at the beginning to again the principle pragmatism. The issue is not that the criteria as such are negotiable. The issue is there a way to create a situation where either you wait for the big reforms, and Serbia saying we're fully aligned with CFSP, we change our constitution, independence of the judiciary. I don't know. I mean, you know the list, or you try and set up a process where through smaller incremental reforms in areas of public procurement, in areas of state aid, in areas of an independence of the judiciary, and all of those are in the reform agendas under the growth plan in a very transparent way, where everybody can see publicly are these reforms being implemented or not, is the government getting paid or not in terms of incentives. So what's the better strategy? I mean, I agree there can be a legitimate debate. Do you want to have big, realignment and reforms, or do you do it in an incremental way? We are opting to make progress in an incremental way to get into a situation where this progress gets a dynamism of its own. And obviously, this is my last word, I think those in Serbia and in all other candidate countries that are pushing governments to work on rule of law, on accountability, ultimately they're the most pro-European forces. And I think we're very, whatever we are saying on rule of law, for example, is exactly what students are demanding from the government in Serbia.
There's clearly an effort to be done there on strategic communication, because the optics are very bad, especially if one compares the situation in Georgia and the rather radical approach by the European Council to decide already de facto that the government, the JD government, has paused its pre-accession process because of the total erosion, a blatant disregard for fundamentals, where you see similar protests, and erosion happening in Serbia, of course. Differences being that in Georgia you have a brutal Russia-style crackdown of the protests, very visible, of course. Maybe easier to take that decision in the council, especially for a country that doesn't have lithium on offer or is willing to buy Rafale jets from France. Whereas more subtle oppression happens, through digital means provided by the Chinese and their expertise in Serbia. So, I mean, people are aware of this, and I understand, that the incremental approach is one worth pursuing in this respect, but the strategic communication about all of this is of course wrong. I understand that this is higher political up the food chain, Tomasz. I'm not putting you personally here on the spot, but I wanted to ask both Mr. Ilkov and Tomasz Wiśniewski this notion which has come back about the hijacking, the bilateral disputes, not just between candidate countries, but in particular between member states and individual candidate countries, and how to resolve it. So, Mr. Ilkov, you mentioned this already in your introductory remarks. Is Ukraine taking steps outside of the formal negotiation process to tackle minority issues with Hungary straight on, or any other disputes that might arise with other member states? I'm thinking, of course, about Poland and the Ukrainian grain and truckers. So please tell us, what is your government thinking or already doing?
Yes, thank you for this question. Indeed, we understand that within the negotiation process, we should agree not only with the European institution, but with every single member state. And this process, to be honest, is not very easy. You mentioned Hungarian case. For me, it's a bit personal issue because I'm a Hungarian on the quarter, yeah, and I know the situation on the ground very good, and that is why, to be honest, I'm not sure that the issue with Hungarians is issue with national minorities. If it will be really a case, this issue will be solved very quick. Nevertheless, we are committed to solve all these bilateral issues, and with Hungary, we had and continue our bilateral dialogue. You know that according to the negotiation framework, we are committed to adopt an action plan on national minorities, and actually this obligation was initiated by Hungary. But now we want to see that every member state and Hungary understand that, okay, we have this commitment. We are now progressing with developing this action plan. Actually, it is already developed, and it aims to address all so-called 11 issues which were raised by Hungary. So I think that we met the precondition for moving forward with opening the first cluster. Again, if Hungary is sincere and really believes that this is the problem which should be solved by Ukraine. And maybe I will reflect on comments from my colleague from ICDS. I strongly agree with his message that we should not lose the momentum, because we understand that the European bureaucracy is one of the best in the world, yeah, and the rules it breaks. They work well, but they work well when everything is calm. But now I think that definitely we need some unconventional, some non-standard decisions, because if we will find ourselves in 3 years discussing the opening, I don't know, the chapter 12 on fishery, yeah, I think that it will be a failure for all of us, yeah. And as I already said in my opening remarks, I think that treaties, and it was also stressed by panelists, even EU treaties, even negotiation framework, it provides possibilities for is gradual integration, for some transitional measures, and the only thing which we should definitely work out is to identify those priorities which are not negotiable, which are red lines for any derogations or any transitions, and this is definitely what will distort the single market or distort the competitiveness. But on the other hand, I will just give you an example. We had an internal discussion in our government regarding the adoption of one of the EU regulations on requirements for drinking water. Yeah? And the Ministry of Health was in charge of developing this regulation, and suddenly the Ministry of Environment will come up with the objections, and they say, okay, guys, you know that if we will adopt these requirements for drinking water, and they will come into force immediately. There will be no drinking water in Ukraine at all. And in order to be fully aligned, additional investments, approximately 8 billion euros are needed. But why I gave this example? So we understand that this is a part of a key, and we understand that this is important part of a key, but whether it should be like a blocking factor for integrating Ukraine, because actually it's very important for Ukrainian citizens, but in any case it doesn't distort eternal market or single market. Thank you.
Mr. Ilkov. I'm aware that I'm, again, running out of time or overtime already. I apologize for the poor timekeeping, but I hope you will bear with us for another 5 minutes. Because this issue of individual member states hijacking the entire progress of one candidate country and the rest of the European Union is, of course, a crucial one which, if left unresolved, is going to delay the whole process in the future. Montenegro, which is currently, yes, on track to becoming perhaps the 28th member state, perhaps in 2028, if all goes well, risks, of course, running into a whole list of Croatian demands as compiled by the Academy of Arts and Sciences a couple of years ago, which go from of course, border demarcation of the Prevlaka Peninsula, but also representational rights of Montenegrins, of Croats in the Montenegrin parliament, restitution of property, for those that were chased out of their homes at the Yugoslav war. So there's a long list that could still be thrown at their feet. We have the Bulgarian holdout on North Macedonia, was referred to. We have potential holdouts of Hungary against Ukraine, and one can imagine many others. So, dear Polish presidency,
no pressure.
What can we do? You referred to, of course, negotiations happening in the hope that some clusters could be opened sooner rather than later in your 6-monthly presidency. But what tools are you actually employing here? And I'm asking because there is an idea out there, perhaps legal in nature, but whereby the holdout state, whether it's Bulgaria or Hungary or any other, is in fact acting out of its duty of legal or sincere cooperation with the rest of the process, out of the negotiation framework principles in a way, and could be justifiably asked to explain convincingly why blocking progress of a candidate country is proportional to the objections that it has, in many cases, on issues which fall outside of the acquis and enlargement process proper. If that member state were unable to make that justification, then the rest would be able to say, well, sorry, we have to go ahead.
Well, that's the most difficult question that you could have posed me at for the last 5 minutes of our panel. Honestly speaking, there was an attempt last spring in 2024 to see whether there is a light in the tunnel for the agreement of the member states to use QMV at least in some of the cases when in the enlargement process, and apparently this discussion took place on General Affairs Council, and it was not conclusive. I mean, there were some member states that said that they will strongly oppose this proposal.
Okay, so QMV is not a road to go for again.
It is.
We had the German.
Unfortunately, it is as Tomasz said. It sounds good, but it
park
is
all of these bilateral disputes outside of the framework. Can there be a strategy developed where all of these bilateral principles are parked outside, and which, as a strategy, is endorsed by all member states?
Well, I think it is very hard to put something if you are just one of the member states into the negotiating framework. It is not an easy task. There is a strong pressure of other member states not to input bilateral issues. So it is done very rarely, and I would say almost all the time only in the cases which are of utmost importance for the current member states. However, it is happening, even though this pressure is, and for years it can block the entire process. So when the majority of the countries the member states are deciding over the negotiating framework, they are trying not to allow to have too many issues, too many bilateral issues in the in this general document that will be leading negotiations for the next years. But it is happening. Yes, this is the reality we are facing. I don't think our presidency can do much in terms of changing the way how the enlargement process looks like. We would like to move forward within the frames that we inherited, but I wouldn't exclude that progress is possible even within this framework, because we are talking about Albania today as an example of a country that can easily go ahead, even though this is the country that for a number of years have been on the waiting list. So Albania is a good example of a country that has gone through the difficult process, and it is successfully going forward. Let us hope that it could happen also with other candidate countries, but we have to remember that in case of Albania, it came with a cost. There were some bilateral issues with Greece in this particular case, and luckily they have been resolved, and they have been resolved in the dialogue between the two capitals, with perhaps support of Brussels or the capital holding presidency. But this example is showing that we can move ahead even within the existing framework.
Yep.
So, no.
We need to close. So very briefly, Tomasz.
Yeah. I just wanted to support my presidency, Tomasz. I mean, because on these bilateral issues, I mean, to simplify a bit, the thing is, member states are not coming forward and saying, "I'm not a nasty guy, and I'm bringing forward a bilateral issue to hold back everybody." That's not the way discussions goes in the council. They more sound like you, Stephen, before, saying, "Oh, it's all about EU values. We need to stick to values. Minority rights are obviously part of Copenhagen criteria. You have to stick to values. It's nothing to do with bilateral issues, nothing at all. It's just about EU values." So that's it's the discussion goes in council.
Yeah. Alar, you had an idea you wanted to pitch here still or not?
It's a very secret idea. I was just thinking whether I put it forward or not.
You're in good company, don't worry.
The EU as such, both the Commission and the Member States, in crisis, and if needed, can be very creative. Very creative. The legal service of the Council can be very creative. I can assure you.
Can be.
So if there is a will, I think it's an English saying, if there is a will, you can do it, yes. There is
a way.
A way, yes. And I'm rather arguing for that. I mean, yes, we are in the process, and that's based on rules. We keep going on that. We do it as good as we can, and the candidates. But in parallel, on the EU side, we should now start really working. I think it was the Danish Prime Minister saying yesterday somewhere that there's no time. There's no time left, simply. And my secret is that in negotiation tactics, there's only thing which puts pressure on the negotiating is time. And
so target date?
Target date, yes. That was suggested. I have been very cautious with that because it has a lot of implications. It has to be very carefully considered. And previously, it's a result of long inputs, many very inputs and then coincidences. There has been something thrown out. I don't know whether just by coincidence by the president of the commission speaking somewhere about 2030. I don't think that I could say that it's realistic. But if the council says, at some of the European Council says, we need to reform ourselves, the European Union, so that we shall be ready by 2035 and guarantee that all the candidates today who wish so will become the members by 2035. If the EU takes such a commitment, that's already a very strong pressure on the process making.
Yeah.
And we can do a lot of things in the process as well. I just give you an example. During our 6 years of negotiations, I think we had about 32 official negotiating meetings. The British, when they negotiated in 1970, I think, Con O'Neill was the chief negotiator. They did it in 1 year.
Yeah, different European Union or
yes,
committee.
The greater number of meetings within 1 year.
Yeah.
I mean, again, there's another story of the coin. If Iceland wanted to become the member today, I mean, it would take probably 1 year. Just the ratification of the treaty, treaty writing 3 months, ratification in the parliaments, because they're already part of the internal market. So
I see disagreement on the panel already. That's food for discussion
that's a long
over
debate.
food. Okay. And Armenia question lingers in the background still. You have not been forgotten, but there's a Black Sea security session later on where we can pick that up again. Luka, you have the last word.
Just maybe the different perspective. We were discussing when the bilateral issues, vetoes or blocks, certain advancement in the process. In the case of Serbia with Cluster 3, it was basically about the rule of law and certain countries in the Western opposing the opening of the Cluster 3 because of the lack of rule of law. And let me just give you an example. In 2023, 7 billion worth of public contracts in Serbia were awarded as exemption to the public procurement law. That's the 10% of Serbia GDP. In other figures, only 3% of public contracts were awarded through public procurement law. There is a reason why one of the key slogans in the protests in Serbia is that corruption kills. Mm-hmm. And that's why the rule of law in this entire process is so much important.
Thanks very much. That's a good point to end on, however depressing it may be. Again, apologies for the timekeeping. Lunch is served outside. Don't run away after your dessert. Come back. We still have 2 super sessions planned for this afternoon. Thanks so much on your behalf again to the panelists.